You're listening to the Spark Your Light podcast, episode number 271, Setting Goals That Spark Your Light. This episode is for you if you always wonder if you're setting the right goals. Should your goals be bigger or are they too big? And sometimes you just don't quite feel as motivated towards your goals as you would like to be. If you can relate to any of that, this episode is something that you're really going to resonate with. So keep listening. This episode is inspired by my own journey with goals. I can't tell you how many times I have set the wrong goal for myself. And it's really important to set the right goal because it makes you feel excited inside. It is truly the definition of having your light sparked when you have a goal that you are lit up about, a goal that you wake up thinking about, a goal that makes you happy even when you're doing something completely unrelated. In the back of your mind, you know that you're working towards this goal and you feel like you're making progress towards it. That is one of the greatest feelings in the world, and I want everyone to feel that way. So that's why we're talking about this concept today. So in order to set a goal that sparks your light, it's extremely important that you figure out how big the goal should be. And before we get into how big it should be, I want to tell you the common pitfalls so that you can identify if you fall into any of these. So the first pitfall is setting goals that are too big. Now, hear me out. I am not saying that your goals need to be realistic. I am not saying that you can't dream really, really big. I believe that we should dream as big as we can possibly dream, as big as we want to dream for our life, that feels good for us, that excites us. And as we work towards these really, really big dreams, we should set goals that get us a little bit closer and a little bit closer and a little bit closer. As we chunk away at that really, really big dream, it no longer becomes so far away. And so set the big, unrealistic dreams, but set a goal that is small enough that you're going to stay committed to it. So the reason that a really, really big goal sometimes doesn't work is because it feels so far away. It feels so unachievable. It feels impossible. You have no hope. When something feels impossible, when you do not believe that you can achieve it, you are much more likely to give up. Because what's the point? If it's impossible, if it's so far, what's the point of taking any action at all? What's the point of doing those hard things when you're 99% sure that you're not going to get the result you want? I have lived this many times. And my favorite example is many years ago, I was working on my first brand, which if you don't know was all around my first book, which was about my struggle with disordered eating. And so I had this Instagram account where I would post about having a healthy relationship with food and body image and things like that. And some of you listening, I know, have followed me ever since then. So I'm very grateful for each and every one of you who has been here from the beginning. But many of you have joined this journey later as my brand has grown more and you've somehow came across this work. So that's the backstory. So I was working on that Instagram account and I was part of this really cool entrepreneurship program that helped mentor young entrepreneurs growing their businesses and also equip them with interns for the summer. So the interns were college students and they were employed by this incredible foundation. And then the businesses, the entrepreneurs, got to actually work with them. So I had 2 summer interns and I decided that our summer project was growing the social media account, specifically Instagram. And I think that I set a goal for the interns and myself that we were going to take the account from 1,000 followers to 500,000 followers. Now, this is for sure possible. We've seen many accounts grow quickly, and especially with Reels and TikTok and many more viral opportunities, it's definitely possible. For context, this was probably back in like 2017. Reels weren't around yet. The most viral opportunities was just a regular picture post going viral, which was really difficult. And even in today's world, I have set goals, growing my following, growing my podcast, X number of people. And the reality is, yes, for some people, there's that magical moment and things happen overnight. But for most people, for most goals, it is about consistency over time and it is a slow churn. And it sort of becomes like an exponential graph where it's slow, 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 slow. And sometimes you hit a turning point where you start to pick up more momentum and you grow faster. And that's what I've found with most of my digital content, whether it's my podcast, social media, email list, all of these things. So a more realistic goal would have been probably a smaller number. But I set this 500,000 follower goal, and we would meet, I think, once a week, and we would have these meetings and we would talk about it. And I'd be like, okay, we went from 1,000 followers to 1,010. But in order to get to 500,000, we need to be growing at, some absurd number, 20,000 followers a week. And we're off track. And then I would get really anxious because I'd be like, we're off track from the goal. And at some point during that summer, I felt so bad for the interns because it wasn't their fault. And we were so off track. And I didn't believe that it was possible. And so if you have a leader that doesn't believe it's possible, then this just really is going downhill. So I told them we need to just nix the goal and try a more realistic goal. And that was the first time I really learned this lesson, that it didn't feel good for me to stop believing in what was possible in the goal. And it didn't feel good for me to feel so far from it. Does it mean that I can't have 500,000 followers on Instagram someday? Absolutely not. But if I were to set more realistic mile markers along the way, then I'd be more likely to get there because I'd be more likely to stay committed to the actions that it takes to grow. And that's the key. Most people stop doing the actions it takes to achieve their goal when their goal feels too far out of reach. So the first thing is to set a goal that isn't too far out of reach. But here's the other pitfall. We also don't want to set a goal that's too far in reach. So this is our other half, people. We have a group of you listening that you want to feel good. You are the kind of person that writes a to-do list after you've completed the items just so you can check the boxes. If this is you, you may find yourself setting goals that are a little too far in reach because it feels like an ego boost. It feels good when we can say, I hit my goal. And maybe you struggle with some perfectionist tendencies where if you don't hit a goal, you really beat yourself up. You make yourself feel bad, like you did something wrong, like it was your fault. And you want to avoid all of these feelings of disappointment. You're probably also the kind of person who doesn't want to get your hopes up because you want to avoid those negative feelings. But the truth is, we can't actually avoid those feelings because you are still going to feel bad if you set a small goal knowing deep down that you actually want it more. You are still going to feel bad knowing that you're not doing the things you want to do in your life because deep down, you know the truth and you know that you're selling yourself short and you know that you're lying to yourself. So if we can't avoid feeling bad, we might as well set a bigger goal. But Jacqueline, if we don't want to set a goal that's too big and we don't want to set a goal that's too small, how do we do that? So the key here is to set a goal that is just outside of reach. So it feels a little scary. It feels a little intimidating. It might require you to get your hopes up, to take a risk of being disappointed, to take a risk of putting yourself out there for this goal and not hitting it. You are not 100% certain that you are going to achieve it. You are nervous that you might not. It feels like you might have to put in a little bit of extra effort, emphasis, push, creativity to reach that goal. But it doesn't feel so far that if you're not on track to it in the first week, that you're going to give up. It doesn't feel so far that you feel like, what's the point of taking any action at all? It doesn't feel so far that if you start falling short, then you won't have the resilience to get back up. It feels just without a reach. So even if you fail a couple of times along that journey of pursuing the goal, you're going to be willing to get back up because there's still a part of you that believes you can reach it. That is the best goal you can set for yourself. That is a goal that will spark your light because that feeling of excitement, of spark won't come when the goal doesn't light you up. And so it won't come when the goal is too small because small goals don't light us up. But it won't come when you don't believe it's possible either, because that's just going to make you feel worse. So that spark comes from the goal that is just outside of reach. So think about this right now for yourself. What's one goal you could set for any area of your life that you're excited about right now that feels just out of reach? And then once you set the goal, here are some key points in helping you achieve it. Number one, you want to set mile markers along the way. This is something I recently started doing. I used to just set the goal, set the deadline, and then I would get to the deadline, either would have hit the goal or not, and then have to make changes. It's sort of like you are driving across the country, and let's pretend we've went back in time to the days of MapQuest when we would print out directions to the place we were going, and they didn't update in real time. They were just printed standard directions. I don't know about you guys, but my dad got lost so many times following MapQuest directions, and he was very stubborn, so he would hate to pull over into a gas station, ask someone for directions, and then my dad would be fighting in the front seat of the car because my mom's like, John, pull over, and my dad's like, I know where I'm going, but clearly we are not on these MapQuest directions anymore. We are lost. Now, it's sort of like that when you don't have mile markers. You're following the directions, but you maybe made a wrong turn and you're lost. But if you don't check in until you're supposed to be there, until let's say you're going to a baby shower and you're supposed to be there at 3:00 and it's now 3:00 and you're like, time to check in, and you're an hour away because you've been lost and you didn't stop for directions. Not good. But if you have a mile marker, like I'm going to just check in on things around 2:30 and see how we're doing. And you're like, okay, it's 2:30. I'm lost. I need to stop somewhere and ask for directions. Then you might be able to get there in time. Or maybe you're not lost, but there's a road closed and you need to stop somewhere and ask for directions. So the same is true when we're pursuing our goals. We need to stop along the way and evaluate where we're at. Are we lost? Did we go off course? Is there a road closed? Did you try something that's not working? Did you realize that you don't actually want this thing, but you want to go in this direction because of some event that brought you clarity? What was it? So we need those mile markers along the way. We need to assess our plan that we're following, the strategy we laid out that we thought was going to work. Is it actually working? Should we make changes, or do we just need to stay consistent with it? So those are what mile markers are for. So in my calendar, I will just write down a couple mile markers. Now, sometimes the mile markers can be chronological date oriented. So I'm going to have a mile marker in a week, in a month, whatever it is, depending on how far out this goal is. Other times they might be related to the task ahead. So for example, I am working on a new keynote speech, and I am giving that speech next week at one of my events. So I know that that is a mile marker that I have to be done my first draft, rehearsed on this first draft of my new keynote for that event. And so that's a mile marker for me. And because of that mile marker, I actually backed into another mile marker. Okay, on this date, I want to be finished kind of like writing the content and more so practicing delivering it. So those are mile markers that have naturally emerged based on the timeline. But other times I might be working on something where my book proposal, for example, where it's just like, okay, the next mile marker is this date. I want to check in with how the outline is going. So you can figure out which mile markers, chronological or more based on the task, make more sense based on the goal you're setting. But you always want to make sure that you have mile markers and you're checking in before the deadline, which gets me to our next point. Deadlines. How many of you hate the word deadline? I know I hate that word. It takes me back to college when there's a 10-page paper due and you're just constantly working up until the last minute, turnitin.com, submitting it at 11:59 p.m. It's just not a fun feeling. And it also may bring up stressful times from work. I know for me, it's brought up book deadlines where I remember I had to have my book in by a certain date. I've definitely extended the deadlines I was supposed to have. I remember I was on an airplane on my way to a speech, and that's where I wrote the introduction to Stop Getting in Your Own Way because it was due. And honestly, I have a lot of luck writing on airplanes because there's no distractions, there's no technology, there's no Wi-Fi. So all I have is my Microsoft Word document and my own thoughts. And that's a great place to write. But I remember thinking, I'd prefer to not be writing this on an airplane right now, right before speech, but this is the reality of the deadline. And so deadlines can bring up a lot of memories for us, sometimes bad. So if you don't love the word deadline and you hesitate on setting a deadline for your goals because of that, this is going to be really helpful for you. Setting a deadline for our goals is important because if we don't set a time that we want to be finished by, why are we going to finish in any timely manner? We have no consistency. We can't work backwards and say, okay, let's say it's a deadline for a book you want to read. You really want to read this book. Maybe you set a goal to read a personal growth book every month this year. Great. So you can work backwards and you can say, I need to read, 3 chapters a week of this book or whatever it is. Without that, you're just going to lackadaisically read your book. You're not going to have any habit, any routine. If you need to read 3 chapters per week, you might say, I'm going to read every morning while I drink my coffee. You're going to form a habit. You're going to do that consistency. And yes, you will read the book plus or minus in the timeline. Does it matter if you get it done exactly per the date you set? No, that doesn't matter whatsoever. So I don't want to create a community of people who are hyper-focused and hyper-stressed. I have to finish reading this book by this date. No, that is not the energy whatsoever. But what is the energy is having consistent habits, being the person who does the things that you want to do, period. So if you want to read every morning with your coffee or most mornings, unless something comes up that's more important, yes, of course, be flexible. Then figuring out, okay, I need to set this deadline to work backwards to get to that place where I figure out what the habit is and how frequently I want to do the habit. That's going to be helpful. So the same is true with any of our goals. I don't want you to look back on 2025 and say, I wanted to do all these things, but I didn't do them. The only way you're going to do them is with habits, is with consistency. So it is important you set the deadline and you work backwards. Otherwise, you will look back on the year and think, I didn't do the things I wanted to do. But we don't have to call it a deadline if that word brings up stress and anxiety. So what I started doing is I started setting target finish dates. These are slightly flexible. So if I finish one day after the target finish date, cool, great. I'm pretty much on track with the direction I want to move in. If I finish 3 days before, great. It's just a timeline for working backwards so that I can figure out where I need to be by when, and I can be committed and accountable to taking the action steps I need to take. So setting target finish dates can be really, really great for setting goals that spark your light because it helps you stay connected to the goal, because the goal can spark your light and you can be busy and caught up on other things and not taking consistent action, and the goal can just sit there. So it is really important that you then work backwards, make a plan, figure out how it's going to fit into your schedule, and the target finish date really helps with that. Last thing that I want to say that's really important. If you do not hit your goal, so let's say your goal is, let's just use a business example. You want to make a certain amount of revenue. You want to make $100,000 in revenue in your business in 2025. And 2025 goes by and you have made $80,000 in revenue. Instead of beating yourself up that you didn't hit the $100,000, I want you to think about, if you didn't set the goal that was just without a reach, what goal would you have set? Let's say you say, I would have set a $60,000 goal. Okay, a $60,000 goal. You probably would have hit it. Would you have hit the 80? Probably not, because you would have made decisions to get to the 60,000. You wouldn't have made decisions to get to the 100,000. So that might have required changing your product offerings, charging higher prices, doing more marketing, whatever it took to get to the 80, you were trying to get to the 100, and that's why you did those things. So the same is true with any goal. I think about this in SYL a lot because some of you have heard this story before. But one time I showed up at a class and there were 5-pound weights underneath my bike. And normally there are 3-pound weights. So someone who rode before me probably swapped them for the heavier weights and left them there. And I was running late to the class, so I didn't check ahead of time. So now it's the middle of class. It's the weights song. And I pull out the weights and I have to use the 5-pound weights. And I thought to myself, I'm not going to be able to finish the whole thing with these 5-pound weights. But then I realized that even if I only got 3/4 of the way through with the 5-pound weights and I put them down and couldn't do any more, I would have lifted more weight than if I got the full way through with the 3-pound weights. What this means is that we make more progress going for the bigger thing than we would have made if we stay small. So I want you to stop obsessing that you have to hit the goal, because all that does is it forces you to play small and set goals you know you're going to hit, which doesn't challenge you and doesn't help you grow and, quite frankly, doesn't spark your light. And that's why you're here. That's why you're listening to this podcast, because you want to live a life that lights you up inside. So it is essential that you are willing to set goals that are going to stretch you, that you are not going to play small anymore. So what I want you to think about is, if I set a goal and I don't hit it, all it means is that I was brave enough to set a big goal. Now, you can look back and reflect and ask why you didn't hit it. Sometimes the answer is time. So I just want to make that really clear here. Sometimes the answer is, I just need more time. So going back to that Instagram example of, I want it to have 500,000 followers. I just need more time. I just need to consistently show up with this message on the internet. And someday I might have 500,000 followers. There have been many times in my business where I wanted to make more money or get more speeches or charge more for my speeches or all these things, have more podcast listeners. And a lot of times the answer was just keep doing the thing consistently over time and you will get to those places. And now looking back, I have many of those things I wanted. I have achieved them with time and consistency. So the answer isn't always, I need a different strategy. Sometimes it is, though. And so, when we reflect on, for example, our season at Vera's, our water, ice, and ice cream shop that we own, we look at, okay, what went really well and what didn't. And sometimes we look at things and we think, we spent a lot of, let's say, money ordering cups that we didn't actually use or didn't actually need. We need to have a better system for organizing our inventory so we can see what we actually already have and order correctly. Or we spent a lot of money at the end of the season ordering product that we never used, that we wasted. So we need to have a better system at the end of the season. So these were some examples from last year that we looked at and that we did differently this year. And so we made more profit on those things because we didn't waste money ordering cups that we didn't need or inventory that we weren't going to sell through. And so, yes, sometimes you can evaluate things and you can find real changes that need to be made. But other times the answer is, I just need to keep being consistent and keep showing up. This is also a common thing with health. So if you're trying to build more muscle, if you're trying to feel better in your body, get stronger, whatever it is, you may just need to keep going to the gym. You may just need to consistently eat healthier over a longer period of time to start to see some of those results. So always know that sometimes when you're reflecting, the answer might be more time, or the answer could be a strategic thing or a combination of both. Most likely that's the answer. If you can figure out a combination of something strategically that you can change and then more time and consistency, you're on a really great path. But the only way you're going to be able to get there is if you stop beating yourself up every time you don't hit your goals. So the first step is stop beating yourself up, because that will allow you to be willing to set the goal that's just without a reach, and then set that goal that is just outside of your reach. Set the mile markers along the way and check in on them, and set a target finish date if it's something that needs one. So whether it's the year, the quarter, whatever it is, some goals I guess technically don't need a target finish date, like if the goal itself is an annual goal, but most goals do. So set that target finish date as a way to keep yourself accountable and work backwards and make a plan. I hope this episode has inspired you to think a little bit differently about your goals so that you can feel excited every single day about the life you're creating. That's the key. The key is feeling good now about what you're building. It's the magic of goals. You can feel this magical feeling inside. And truly that's what I mean when I say spark your light, that your light is sparked. It's this magical feeling inside you get when you are in process of creating something that you're excited about in your life. That's it. And that's what setting the right goals does for you. So try it and let me know what goals you are excited about, what goals are sparking your light. if any of this has really helped you, I would love to hear about it. I would love to hear about your journey. Send me a message. Never be afraid to reach out. I love hearing your stories. And even I'd like to share more of your stories on the podcast too. So if any of you are listening and some of the things we've talked about have helped you, send me a message, because maybe we could have you as a guest and you could share about how some of these concepts have helped your life, and maybe they can help other listeners. So always feel free to reach out. This is not a one-sided conversation. Thank you so much for being a listener. So grateful to have you here. And I hope you have an amazing week, and I will catch you in the next episode. Wonderful. Thank you.